Last week, we saw the long-awaited release of the sequel to the 2016 smash hit Zootopia with the aptly named Zootopia 2. Now, when the first film released close to 10 years ago at this point, it was another in a big string of successes for Disney as a whole. However, even in the context of the crushing success of the revival era where Walt Disney Animated Studios were churning out hit after hit after years of lesser output, and whilst Pixar continued to be as hot as they ever were, it was still clear Zootopia was something special. I mean, after all, it's not every day a film manages to gross over $1 billion at the box office, right? That being said, I do feel as if it's a film that, in the years after its release, has somewhat fallen by the wayside in terms of its place within the fandom as a whole. I feel that at the time, despite its overwhelming success both critically and commercially, the film was written off as a kiddie film, or a bit of a fluke in the numbers. For years afterwards, you'd have posts and comments and discussion about how Zootopia isn't that popular. Stuff like, oh, my kid never watches it on Disney Plus, and none of his friends do either. Or saying how it doesn't need to be part of the Disney parks, or whatever weird new goalpost they set up to judge its popularity and prestige. It frustrated me though, because it was such a great movie in my eyes, and I felt very alone in my opinion. Obviously, I'm not delusional, and I recognize that I wasn't the only person enjoying the first film, but just felt like it sometimes. I mean, in terms of Walt Disney Animation, this film was by far their most successful non-musical film ever, and yet it's treated as lesser than so many other films that objectively did far worse than it. Make it make sense. Of course, my first taste of vindication came in the midst of the utter meltdown of Disney/Pixar at the box office over the first half of the 2020s. It's been a huge come down from the glorious 2010s and arguably has been their least successful era ever. So what is one of the first franchises trotted out to try to staunch the bleeding and get the studio back on track with obvious future plans even beyond a second film? Well, there was Moana, of course, but also Zootopia. Clearly the studio has extreme faith in it, even if a subsection of fans doesn't. Then, of course, not too long ago the film was released, and what do you know? It's been explosively popular to a level that Disney has not seen in quite a long time, even with Moana 2 last year, which ended up grossing over $1 billion when all was said and done. Zootopia 2 had its wide-scale release on the 26th of November, and to date it's grossed $617 million. By the time I'm writing this, it's only been out for a week, and so already it's fairly clear that, by the numbers, the movie's doing very well for itself as a whole. Already it's the 8th highest grossing film of the year, and it's obviously going to keep on going for quite some time. It's only the early days and it's chased down the likes of Superman in 1 week. I think it's rather obvious it's going to end its run as the highest grossing Western animated film of the year, and will also make a play to challenge for that record. Will it be able to do so? I'm not so sure, to tell you the truth, but at the very least, I do think there's a chance to push towards $2 billion. Time will tell. On top of that, it's not just a financial success either, it's well liked too. It has a 93% critical approval rating off of 174 reviews, and 96% audience rating off of over 2,500 reviews. Yeah, Rotten Tomato scores can be deceptive, and certainly not the be-all and end-all of determining the quality of a movie, but at the very least I think this shows that the movie isn't just a terrible film skating by on name alone to turn a big profit off the back of the original. It's been very well received in its own right, and thus I think word of mouth has a big chance of continuing to help the juggernaut chug along and rack up those box office earnings. Of course, this brings us to the film itself. Did I think it was any good? Well, I guess the short answer would be yes. I thought it was really good and I had a great time with it. I think I prefer the first one, but it's not like the sequel's some severe drop off in quality, and honestly, I think it's probably just down to simple preference at the end of the day. When you're breaking down an animated movie, I always find it's easiest to divide it up into 3 main overarching categories: the visuals, the audio elements, and then the narrative side of things. And I guess we'll start off with the visuals. The film looks good, and I don't think that's some grand or controversial statement in any way, shape, or form. The original film back in 2016 looked incredible at the time, and obviously with the advances in technology that have come in the time since then, it was going to look better in 2025. That's how it works for the really big studios in the current climate. You know that they have the most money to throw around, and so it's impossible to accept anything less than excellence in terms of visual quality on display. This isn't some random startup company trying to make their first real big splash in the business, but an industry heavyweight with a long history of upping their game with every single film. Thus, it's not really a triumph or a virtue at this point for the design to be good or for the animation to be smooth or fluid, but more an expectation. That may not seem completely fair, but honestly, it's just how it is. Luckily though, the film had all of that and lived up to the standards that it needed to. The animation quality was high and the world and character designs were great too. Obviously, a lot of what was done in this film was riffing off of what was done in the first movie, but at the same time, there was a lot of really cool new stuff that they included here as well. In particular, all of the different reptile characters. I mean, all of them felt unique and interesting in their own way, but I have to say the main one's obviously Gary the Snake. For starters, since he has no arms or legs, the way he moves and interacts with the world has to be so different to everybody else, which I think they captured really well visually. The vast majority of the other characters that exist in this world have been given more humanized qualities, but that's not something you can really accomplish with a snake. And so they had to figure out how do snakes interact with the world of Zootopia in ways that would make sense, but also not leave them somewhat handicapped going through life. I also loved how they were able to take what is traditionally a somewhat creepy and scary animal in a venomous snake and simply using visuals able to turn him into an absolute cutie. It's just an incredible piece of character design if you ask me. However, it's not all in the design either, as the action in this film is really great as well. I'm very much enjoying this renaissance of top tier animated action across every single company, and I think you can pretty much draw a line back in how they all approach it to Into the Spider-Verse. Nowadays, action is so high octane and impactful, the type of fast-paced, high-intensity visuals that'll keep you on the edge of your seat, and yet aren't going too fast for you to take in what's going on. Combine that with a whole heap of creativity and combining different animal types with sizes, weight classes, and ways of moving/fighting, and suddenly you have a really fun and exciting movie, at least in terms of your visual aspects. So already on the surface, the film's passing with flying colours, but of course that's not the be-all and end-all to a film either. What about the audio side of things? In terms of the music and score, I think it was good, you know? Michael Giacchino did the first one, he's a great composer, and I think the film was always going to be in good hands there, and indeed it was. It's important for the actual score for this type of film to be good because it can't be masked by having a couple of top-tier earworm hits because this isn't a musical film. However, I think the soundtrack really holds its own and adds a lot of emotion to a lot of crucial scenes, particularly the heartfelt stuff with Nick and Judy, and then the big action climax right there at the end in Tundra Town. I was also curious as to whether the new Shakira song for this film would be able to live up to Try Everything, which I felt like was an absolute banger back in the day and still regularly finds itself in my playlist today. And what do you know? It was. Zoo is yet another Zootopia classic, and I suspect it's also going to feature in my playlist going forward for a good long while. Then we come to the voice acting, and of course this is an incredibly important piece of the puzzle for an animated film, and having high quality performances can add a whole lot of shine to an otherwise middling script. Not that this was a middling script or anything like that, but you get what I mean. This was a very good script and story, and so the excellent performances just enhanced it even further in that regard. For starters, every single member of the returning cast, in particular the two leads, were really incredible, and once again, Nick and Judy had so much depth of character infused across their performances. Then of course you have Gary the Snake, who is just really heartfelt and a sweet performance, really cute. Even when he's the mysterious, antagonistic character early on, there's this compelling charm about him that hints to things below the surface. Then there's Paul Lingsley, who ends up as Disney's latest in a long line of twist antagonists, and who Andy Samberg plays to perfection, with this really sweet and innocent side that slowly melts away to become dangerously unstable the more his schemes fail and the more the heroes thwart him. Then there's also the wealth of minor characters dotted throughout the film who might only have a couple of lines here or there, but in those lines are able to convey so much character, personality, and humour. It's just a really well acted piece across the board, and I think it deserves recognition for that fact. This then brings us to the story and narrative elements, which was probably the big triumph for the first time around. Not just the actual tale being told, but the extra tidbits of the writing, the jokes, the dialogue, little gags revolving around the nature of different species and how they might interact with one another, goofy references to pop culture but in an animal world context, and of course a healthy dose of slapstick humour and biting quips to tie it all together. The first film was really well constructed in that way, and as a result it was engaging and extremely rewatchable, and the second film is no exception. It has everything that made the first film good, and whilst I wouldn't say it really changes up the formula all that much, at the same time when the film's good and it knows what it wants to be, then I'm not sure you need to change things up too much. But now the story, right? Zootopia 2 picks up in the immediate aftermath of the first Zootopia film, or rather the epilogue of the first film. In that epilogue, Nick ended up going to the police academy and graduated, being assigned to the ZPD as Judy's partner. At the end of that film, they seem to be very much on the same page in terms of working together as a team, and yet Zootopia 2 takes a different approach, with much of the drama of the story beyond the actual adventure stemming from the fact that despite that they care deeply for one another, it doesn't automatically make them well suited as partners, at least in this early stage. I will say that whilst I'm extremely happy with the film now, at first I was sitting in the theatre thinking, really? They're going this hard with the partners in crisis? Didn't they just have a story like that in the first movie where it's an odd couple scenario and they have to learn to be a team? However, over the course of the movie, and certainly now in hindsight, I realised that this just isn't the case and I had jumped the gun and misinterpreted things. In actuality, this film is more about diving deeper into the way the characters of Judy and Nick think and how they interact with their newfound bond. The reality is that Zootopia was about both of them learning to trust one another and see deeper than what society expects. They realised that now they both have somebody they can depend on, but what was never really addressed was their core personality traits and the question as to whether they would work well as a team beyond the very specific context laid out in the first movie. Beyond the surface level and gaining an ally and friend, they never really changed all that much as people, and neither did they learn to consistently work together as a team, and so really, that's what this film heavily deals with, and it does it very well. That's where we pick up, with Judy and Nick trying to prove themselves to the rest of the ZPD, because despite solving one of the biggest cases in the history of the city, they're still being treated as a little rookie team who simply got lucky. Of course, for somebody like Judy, who's desperate to earn their respect and by doing so prove that she and Nick belong together as a team, it causes her to act out and become more and more reckless. She disobeys direct orders again and again in this opening sequence, first by infiltrating a shipping facility with Nick and the Fennec Fox he's friends with to try to make a big bust on some smugglers. When they're found out, Bogo makes contact to tell them to stand down, but instead, Judy and Nick, largely at Judy's prompting, go on a high-speed chase all over Zootopia, which culminates with them crashing into a statue being unveiled by the new mayor to celebrate the founder of Zootopia, Ebenezer Linksley. At the same time as all of this though, it seems as if Nick doesn't really even care about being a police officer at all, wanting to do the bare minimum and snarking and sniping at Judy every chance he gets. I do feel that for the most part, the film tries to treat these as two sides of the same coin, in that Judy's too gung-ho and controlling, whilst Nick's too laid back, but honestly for me, I'm not sure it completely comes across the way they intended. Judy, yes, she was overbearing and reckless, but in the end, she is always right here. If she doesn't bust the smuggler, they don't get on the trail of the snake, and if she doesn't pressure Nick into breaking into the gala, then they're not there to help Gary escape, and he could be arrested and chucked into prison for life. If she doesn't keep on this case the entire way through, then eventually Gary's going to get murdered by Porbit, and the Linksleys will get away with having framed reptiles and stolen their district, while being able to move in to destroy Marsh Market too. Meanwhile, Nick complains and fights Judy every step of the way, and eventually you get the reveal that it's ultimately because she's his number one priority, and he doesn't want to lose her or for her to get hurt, and that is understandable, but when it constantly forces him to be in the morally wrong position, he doesn't really feel equal, you know? Here we have a pretty funny interlude where Judy and Nick go to partner therapy, and the therapist just calls them out in front of the group and says it's going to take multiple years to resolve their issues. And I'm not trying to crap on therapy, but in this context, surely the doctor's milking it. Surely she's just trying to ensure her contract with the precinct keeps getting renewed. I mean, why the hell would some of these partnerships even continue? They clearly do not work. Like the elephant who's scared of the mouse, or the creepy touchy-feely guy, or the honey badger that keeps throttling her partner every single time he smiles. Oh well, it's good for some comedy, that's for sure. So Judy continues to feel that there's something more to the case, seeing as a snake hasn't been seen in Zootopia in 100 years, when a snake supposedly tried to take the life of Ebenezer Linksley, but killed his tortoise mate instead. Once again going against orders, and on their last chance from Bogo before being split up, Judy and Nick infiltrate the Zootennial Gala, which are being held to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the founding of the city, which is where they run into Gary the Snake. Yes, Gary the Snake. That is his actual name, and that reveal is probably one of my favourite gags in the entire film. Gary snatches Milton Linksley, the patriarch of the family, and takes an old journal within which lies the secret of how the weather walls of Zootopia were created, and thus allowed all the various different climates to coexist as one grand city. Judy and Nick catch up with them, and at this point, Milton shows his true colours and orders them to kill Gary, and when they refuse, he frames them as working alongside Gary for nefarious purposes, and since Chief Bogo's accidentally bitten and injected with venom, Milton's ploy is successful. Without Bogo, they have no real allies in the ZPD, which leaves the mayor to take charge. The mayor is a classic Kronk-type himbo with a similar arc in that he's a well-intentioned idiot who eventually does the right thing, but for now he's the enemy and sends the cops out after Nick and Judy, who are in turn on the trail of Gary, who escaped with Porbit on the back of a motorbike. Acting on a tip from Mr. Big and his daughter Fru, Nick and Judy meet up with local conspiracy theorist podcaster Nibbles Maplestick, who leads them to Marsh Market, where a secret sect of reptiles make their home. Honestly, this whole section of the movie is just peak world building. Marsh Market and the reptile speakeasy is so memorable and well implemented and filled with so much quality humour. Here they meet up with a basilisk named Jesus, who tells them the truth of things. The Tundra Town had absorbed the original home of the reptiles, and now it was threatening their new home in Marsh Market. Here is where the ZPD appear, and Nick and Judy are forced to go on the run once again, this time escaping to some water pipes chasing after Gary in yet another truly excellent action sequence. Nick manages to get them out of a safety hatch just in time as Judy was running out of air rapidly, causing their first major fight. Oh so conveniently though, they learn from a pair of German mountain climbing goats that they're right near the Honeymoon Lodge, which is a place that used to be used as a hideout for snakes. The two climb to the top of the cliff with the police on their tail, and here they get the true proof that reptiles were once part of Zootopia. It's also where we get the big fracture within the team, with Nick wanting to bail and go off with Judy and keep them safe because he doesn't think this is worth dying for, but Judy thinks it is. Honestly, Nick does get his redemption in the end, and his reasoning for all of this is cute and that he loves her and wants her to be safe, but in this moment, it does make him look like such a coward and a chump. I think that's my only real major critique here. I wish they'd balanced that feeling of them both being right and wrong a lot more. Then again, maybe you actually get positioned to side with different characters depending on your own personal viewpoints, and I just side with Judy, and in that light, maybe it's actually rather clever and nuanced writing. The cops turn up and Nick's arrested, while Porbit and Gary arrive and save Judy, taking her to Sahara Square where they get the full truth. Porbit's great-grandfather had stolen the patent of Agnes de Snake, the true creator of the weather walls and founder of Zootopia, and had murdered his own maid to try to cover up the crime. Whilst he did get away with it, Porbit's decided to help Gary try to make amends and stop his family from doing it all again in Marsh Market. All they need is the original patent, which is located in Agnes's house in the Reptile District, buried under the snow in Tundra Town. In order to get it, all they need to do is head inside the weather walls and turn on the old switch powering Reptile Town, which will in turn activate the lighthouse beacon near where she lived. So off they go to do just that, with the cops once again hot on their tail, whilst Nick has a come to Jesus moment in prison where he realizes that he was wrong and he needs to step up to help Judy, and so he and Nibbles stage a prison break whilst accidentally releasing every deranged criminal held in the facility, who all managed to escape into the public. Bit of a whoopsie. That feels like it could make a really fun spin-off series of shorts in the vein of Zootopia Plus, to tell you the truth. I kinda hope they make that. Trying to recapture all of those convicts in increasingly ridiculous ways with elaborate schemes and costumes. It sounds like a lot of fun. Calling Flash for a ride, the trio arrived just in time to save Judy, Gary, and Porbert from being stopped by the cops, and if I remember correctly, Judy was straight up about to die. The cops were going to give her a lethal injection, which honestly feels a bit much, especially since in 20 minutes or so, the very same cops are going to turn against the Lynxleys. Whilst Nick and Nibbles get delayed, Judy, Porbert, and Gary turn on the power and see the lighthouse, which is where we get the villain reveal of Porbert. So we have yet another twist villain, and usually I would say they're overplayed and have occurred in way too many Disney films over the last decade, but here it did feel a bit more tongue-in-cheek and like they know this, like they were playing off that. They understand what the formula is, and so they manipulate it, making you unsure about him the whole way along. On the one hand, he is kind of suspicious and has a heap of motive, but on the other hand, you have that meta question of, would they really do two villain twists back to back? So in that regard, I think it actually was a pretty good twist, worked well, and didn't feel derivative or overdone. Judy gets stabbed with venom, and Gary is tossed out into the snow, where he starts to go into shock and can't move. Nibbles gets stabbed with the venom too, and so it's up to Nick, who grapples with Porbert for the anti-venom, and sacrifices himself to save Judy by tossing Gary the anti-venom pen. Gary, of course, had managed to slither over to Judy and had this big cute hug to warm him up and let him properly wake up, which is probably one of the cutest parts of the entire film. I was just smiling ear to ear at that point. Nick gets the pen to Gary, who saves Judy, and then saves Nick from falling off the cliff with Porbert, and our two heroes have their big emotional conversation where they open up about their insecurities and how much they care for the other, whilst Gary goes to revive Nibbles. For a moment, I was wondering, were they going to lean into the romance? They had been doing a lot of teasers and references pretty much the entire film, and they did skirt around things here quite a bit, but at the same time, they've also kept it open, so I'm curious as to how it plays out in the future, or do they just keep this nebulous tension forever, you know? They did make a lot of jokes about it through the movie though, just saying. The group make their way to Agnes's home, and the Lynxleys are utterly destroyed, with the mayor laying a beat down on Milton and his older kids, whilst Porbert cops a frying pan to the head from the Warthog cops. I will say though, I thought that those heroic turns were perhaps a little bit rushed because we didn't spend enough time with those characters to really make it feel like they were struggling with all of this, but it still worked well and was satisfying. The truth is revealed, Reptile Town's restored, and Gary's family is able to return to Zootopia after 100 years of exile, whilst Nick and Judy return to the ZPD in triumph with a post-credit scene teasing birds next time. So obviously they were banking on the film doing very well and have planned ahead for the future, and given they had a post-credit scene like this, it makes me think the third film's going to be coming sooner rather than later. We're not going to be waiting another decade. My god, this film is good. Just a really enjoyable, well-written piece with lots of drama, character development, excellent interactions, action, acting, music, top quality animation, a story filled with twists and turns that plays on modern Disney tropes and manipulates you with them, whilst having a lot of laughs and excellent references. What's not to love? Zootopia 2 has cemented this franchise as one of my favorites in Disney's catalog, and I think it's only going to get bigger from here. The sky's the limit, and I'm super keen to see what they cook up next. Until then though, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of Zootopia 2? Did you like it? Hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.